How to Publish Like the Pros by Joel Friedlander and Betty Kelly Sargent, which is presented by Kirkus Reviews. In this webinar, Betty and Joel will use their backgrounds in traditional and self-publishing to explain how to create the best book that you can. I'm Karen Schechner, Kirkus Indie's Senior Editor, and I'll be the moderator for today's talk. Following the talk, we'll have time for questions. The entire talk will be on the Kirkus Reviews YouTube channel. If there's anything you missed, you can go back and check that. To find it, youtube.com/KirkusReviews. So first, a little about Kirkus and Kirkus Indie. Kirkus reviews more than 8,000 books per year. Kirkus has been reviewing since 1933. We've got a huge archives of reviews and interviews at Kirkus.com. You can go back and see what our critics said about, for example, For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Catcher in the Rye, which got a star, Everything That Rises Must Converge, which also got a star. So Kirkus Indie reviews self-pub books. Books are submitted for review by the author. Kirkus has an extensive database to match the right book with the right reviewer. So whether it's a literary novel, sci-fi, YA, American history, LGBT memoir, Kirkus will find a reviewer experienced with that genre. The author pays for the review to generate the revenue to pay the editors and the reviewers and our overhead. The author can decide whether to publish the review or keep it private. All reviews are held to the same editorial standards as the rest of the magazine. The review gives indie authors the chance to earn honest critical acclaim. So what happens if the author does publish the review? It's immediately posted on Kirkus.com. It may be included in the print magazine. Kirkus may do a feature interview with the author. The book can be chosen by the editors as a recommended title, chosen as a book of the month, or more rarely, awarded a Kirkus star. If awarded a star, the author is eligible for Kirkus's new literary prize. The award is $50,000. All published reviews are part of Kirkus's content feed, used by Barnes & Noble, Google, Baker & Taylor, etc. The reviews are seen by agents, editors, publishers, librarians, and booksellers. Indie authors can often work directly with your local indie booksellers. Indie booksellers have found that by selling self-pub titles, they could fill a niche too small for traditional publishers and could also fill a need within their community. So some of the bookstores that do work with their local self-pubbed authors are Harvard Bookstore, McNally Jackson, Boulder Books, Tattered Cover. They sell self-pub books on consignment. Some offer in-house printing with the Espresso book machine, and they have tiered marketing options, including signings and readings, newsletter inclusion, front-of-store placement, and postcard mailings. So Kirkus Indie reviews more than 4,000 books per year, and many miss the mark, but some are standouts. So what catches Kirkus's attention? The same qualities as traditionally pubbed books, fast-paced with hooks every chapter, like The Hunger Games, or ironic, hilarious, cultural satire, as in super sad, true love story. Lyrical coming-of-age novels like Outstealing Horses. Some of the indie titles chosen for our best of list, to give you some examples, were The Angel on My Shoulder, a memoir about a pit bull who smells like fresh-cut grass, baked pork, and a hint of unmentionables. Black Art, a literary neo-noir mystery with a suave transgender hero. And The Right Taxi, a poetry collection from a Jesuit priest/English professor who writes of martinis sipping rhinos. With the gatekeepers gone, we're seeing more experimental books, work from authors who don't want to publish traditionally, and also titles from authors who do want to publish traditionally and see the review as a way toward that goal. When we do see a great title, our reviewers and editors notice, and the recognition can help launch a writing career. So what happens when an indie author gets it right? Darcy Chan, author of The Mill River Recluse, sold more than 800,000 copies of her book. The key to such sales, of course, is to start with a good book, but another factor that's nearly as important is discoverability. Darcy talked about how she got discovered in a Wall Street Journal article. She bought a few ads on websites specifically targeting ebook readers. She priced her book at 99 cents, and she bought a Kirkus review. Deborah Henry, who won a Kirkus Star for her novel The Whipping Club, said the review gave her instant credibility. More recently, Kirkus added editorial services. To find out about these services or Indie, visit Kirkus.com and click For Authors. Everyone attending today's webinar can use the promo code HPLP to get $50 off of a Kirkus Indie review or editorial services through May 14th. And here's that code, along with the YouTube channel address. Okay, so on to the main event. Joel Friedlander is an award-winning book designer, a blogger, the author of A Self-Publisher's Companion, expert advice for authors who want to publish, and the recently published The Self-Publisher's Ultimate Resource Guide. Betty Sargent is the founder of Bookworks and writes a monthly column on self-publishing for Publishers Weekly. She is a member of the Independent Editors Group and has spent more than 30 years in the traditional publishing business, most recently as editor-in-chief of William Morrow. She is the author of 7 traditionally published books and 1 self-published book. We're especially excited to introduce them today, and now I'll turn the controls over to Joel.
Well, thank you, Karen. That was a lovely introduction, and it's great to hear about some of the success that authors have had using Kirkus reviews. So that's great. Hopefully everybody can see my screen fine, and I just wanted to say a word about exactly why we put this together. You'll notice on the screen at the top it says The Self-Publisher's Ultimate Resource Guide. This is a book that Betty and I collaborated on because we realized that for authors who are trying to enter the self-publishing space, usually the most difficult question they face is, how do I find the people to help me publish a really professional book? And I noticed looking at the covers of most of the books that Karen was talking about that they looked pretty good. They were obviously designed by professional designers. And that's the whole subtext for this talk today. If you want to publish a book and you hope to be successful in the marketplace, you have to realize that your book is going to be competing with lots and lots of books that were produced by professionals, and by that I mean by traditional publishers, because everybody working there is a professional at what they do. So what we're going to try to do today is put some of the tools into your hands so that you can also produce a book that's a professional book that you'll be really proud of and that will really stand out and help to sell your work to all the people that you hope to influence when you launch the book. So we're going to start with the editorial process because that is the most important thing. And Betty, I'm going to turn it over to you to deal with the editorial process.
Terrific. And I just want to remind everybody that all of these slides will be available to you later through Kirkus, so don't worry too much if you can't capture all this information, because there's a lot of great information here. So the first thing that an independent author really needs to do, in my opinion, is hire a professional editor. The 2 essential outside services that we believe you need are an editor, a professional editor, and a professional cover designer. Because what you want to do is make your book the best it can be. And all traditionally published books have a professional editor, so why shouldn't you? That's our point here. So what you need to know next is what kind of editors there are. There we go. We have 3 groups of editors. There's number 1, which are called developmental, substantive, or content editors. And those are the people who work with you. I'll explain a little more in a minute. But they work with you right from the beginning. Then you have copy editors, and these are the people sort of like your high school English teacher who go over your manuscript and make sure there are no typos, there are no misspellings, that it's really pretty top line in terms of accuracy. And then we have proofreaders, which are the people who, if you're doing a print book, They take a look at what comes back from the printer to make sure that everything the copy editor has suggested has been put into your manuscript. Okay, next slide. Here comes our next slide. Well, as I just said, the developmental editor, in my view, is essential because that's the person who takes an objective look at your manuscript and helps you figure out where to take it, how to do it, what's missing, what you need to know. Okay? We're going to fly through these slides because we have so much material here today, so I hope you're okay with our pace. What a fiction editor does, if you're writing fiction, they'll help you with your plot structure and building suspense, with your story development, the tone, the consistency, point of view, which is really important, readability. They're an absolute essential part of your book, of your novel. Okay? And nonfiction.
Betty?
Yes?
Excuse me, Betty.
Yes.
Yeah, but would you mind talking just a little bit louder?
Oh, sorry. Okay. So if you're writing nonfiction, memoir, history, your editor is going to help you with organization, keeping it original, making your message effective with the tone, the fact-checking, and comparing your book with other books in the same market. Okay? Okay. Copy editor, as I said before, is like your English teacher. They'll read your manuscript for style, spelling, punctuation, syntax, point out errors, and as we love to say, generally make sure you don't embarrass your friends or your family. Next. Proofreaders, as I mentioned, look for typographical errors, punctuation errors, formatting errors. And in traditional publishing houses, they're the ones who go over what you get back from the printer to make sure everything is all set to be printed. Okay, now, where do you look for an editor, and how do you know it's the right one for you? Next. Okay. In my opinion, a good freelance editor, a really good one, is someone who has had experience in the traditional publishing business, probably in New York, because that's where most of the traditional publishing business is. You can have people who are experienced with writing, teachers, friends of your mother, whatever, other kinds of people who had a writing background. If you really want the best you can get for your book, we recommend that you hire someone with experience in the traditional book publishing business. Experience pays, as you know, so don't cheat yourself by hiring less than the best. So here is a list of where you can find terrific editors. I won't bore you by going over the list, but you can print it out and check it out, and they're all first-class editors available from this list. Next.
And Betty, sorry to interrupt one more time. And Kirkus also has editorial services, and as Betty was saying, that many of the editors in New York have been working for the Big Five editors for their careers, and those are the editors that Kirkus works with. So if you're interested in finding them, you can go to kirkus.com and click for authors.
Okay, absolutely. And if that wasn't on the list, I apologize. That should have been on the list. But the trick is to really try to get in touch with an editor with real professional trade book publishing experience. So let's say you found this editor now, or you're interviewing editors. What do you look for? You chat with this person. You tell them what your goals are. It's important to be very clear on what you expect from this person. Ask for his or her credentials. Do you like her? Is she enthusiastic, he or she, about your project? Make sure you feel a positive connection with this person, because your relationship is going to become a very close one, and it's important that you feel this kind of sympathy for each other, or that you're that your goals are the same. Next slide. Okay. So how do you know it's the right person for you? Well, you know what your budget is. So you want to find out how this person, this potential editor, fits into your budget. Does she work by the project, by the page, by the hour? And when and how does she expect to get paid? Some other questions you have to pin down clearly. What's the timeline? How long does she think that this process is going to take? And of course, some of this depends on how quickly you return to her the things that she suggests you do, but basically you want to have a feeling for the overall time parameters here. Okay? And I always suggest that you ask if this person has had experience with self-publishing. It's not essential because a good editor is a good editor regardless of how you plan to publish your book, but it's nice if the editor you're working with kind of knows her way around the self-publishing arena, because it is somewhat different. I mean, it is considerably different from that of the traditional book publisher. So she can be a lot of help there. Okay. And the final thing, and this is really so important, trust your instincts when you work with your editor. If your editor suggests that you do X, Y, or Q, and you think that's really wrong, then it is really wrong for you. The editors have had experience, they've been around the block, they know what they're talking about, but it is your book, and your name is going to be on this book. So always do, in the final analysis, what you are comfortable with and what you feel is right. Okie doke, Joel?
Okay, hey, thanks, Betty. And I just want to say, personally, I have been a book designer for many years, but when authors ask me what's the most important thing that they should take into account when they are getting ready to publish their own book, I always tell them the first thing you need is an editor. And if the only thing you have is a budget that will only cover one person, hire the editor. You can put the book together somehow to get it out there. I'm not recommending that you cheap out on design, but what I'm trying to say is that editing is by far the most important thing. We don't want to see any authors publishing unedited books. It's really not a good idea. So now talking about design, and I am only talking about cover design today because I think really when you think about it, when you become a book publisher and you stop being strictly an author, and that is what I'm talking about, is people who publish their own books, indie authors, you have to take off your author hat and put on your publisher hat. And the publisher is somebody who wants to create a book that's going to be appealing to the largest number of people possible because it's a business, right? That's what book publishing is. So it's really important to find a cover designer who really understands book cover design. This is not really general graphic arts, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you start looking for designers, there are lots of places you can look. Most of the problem we've had in the past is that you might see a book cover you like, but very often the designers aren't credited, so it's almost impossible for somebody outside the industry to find out who did that cover. Now, with a lot of the assets we have available online, this is not as big a problem anymore. And here are some resources right here on this slide that will help you find tons of great professional cover designers. Not everybody you're going to find on 99 Designs is a professional cover designer, but there are some really great designers who work there, and I know a lot of authors like that site. So it's the same thing when you hire a designer as when you hire an editor. You have to have certain criteria, and the most important thing I can mention is, and this is all about producing professional books, is to hire a book cover designer, not a general graphic designer. And look, I am a designer. I know how this works. If you walk into a designer's studio and you say, hey, can you do a book cover for me, even if they've never done one before, they're going to say, hey, sure, I could do that. What's the big deal? But book cover design is actually a specialty. You know, a 6x9 book cover has 54 square inches, and the designer knows how to make every square inch count in communicating what the book cover is supposed to do. And book covers have a lot of jobs to do. You know, it's like consumer product packaging. You know, in the soap industry, when you go to the supermarket and you buy soap, really almost exclusively what you're buying is the packaging. And a lot more money goes into the packaging of soap than goes into the manufacture of the stuff inside the package. And book covers are a little similar to that in that we rely on them to draw the interest of potential readers and get them excited enough to actually pick up the darn book. Now, in addition, whatever designer you pick should be really familiar with the kind of books you write. If you're writing romances, you don't want a book designer who has only done nonfiction books or histories. If you know, and by the same token, if you're writing thrillers, you want a designer who actually knows what appeals to the readers in that market. And somebody with a lot of experience doing thrillers is going to be really your best bet. Obviously, online, it's really easy also to look at the portfolios that designers have posted, and you'll get a feeling right away for whether that designer is going to be able to create a book that not only pleases you, but also appeals to your readers. And those are two completely different things, usually. Okay, what about once you've found the designer, you're really excited, you think she's going to create the perfect cover for your book and really make it shine when it goes on the market, and you know, I always use a written agreement when I do projects for clients, and I recommend you never hire somebody without a written agreement, whether it's an editor, a cover designer, an interior formatter, it doesn't matter. The agreement is there to save you problems down the road, like if things don't quite work out the way you thought they were going to. The agreement will also indicate exactly what the price is. It'll indicate when you're supposed to make payments. It'll indicate what's being covered by the compensation you're giving the designer, what their responsibilities are. And look, if you are on a deadline, you have to make sure up front the designer knows about that. You know, don't get to the end and say, okay, we're in agreement. By the way, I need it next Wednesday. And the designer says, well, that's impossible. I can't do it. That doesn't work. Now, I want to pay just a little attention to this third bullet point here about understanding what it is you're buying. Are you going to own artwork, or are you licensing it? Now, the fact is, for many novels, there's frequently custom artwork is created, and that could be a photograph, it could be a collage, it could be an illustration that you go to an illustrator and hire them to create the cover for your book. In many cases, the designer will contract with an illustrator to get a design for your book or an illustration. And this is really important. I've actually had this experience consulting with authors where they bought an illustration, maybe it wasn't even that expensive, they were very happy with it, but they didn't realize they didn't own it, they were only licensing it, and the book became very popular, and they went back to print more copies, and the illustrator stepped in and said, excuse me, but you owe me more money for the additional licensing fee. So this is not, I'm not making this up, this really does happen. A lot of illustrators will not sell you their artwork. They will only license it. You have to make a business decision about whether that's the right way for you to go. And I will talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And here's the key question. This, you know, becomes an issue more often than you would think. Now, for instance, when you get to the end of the project, you know, maybe you had a good relationship with the designer, maybe you didn't, maybe you're going to use her again, maybe you'd like to try somebody else, maybe you want to revise that book or do a box set with that artwork or make posters out of it. There's lots of different ways you can use the artwork that's generated for your cover because it's really the brand for your book. So frequently what happens is you get to the end of the project and you say, oh, can I have those files that you created? And the designer says, no, those are my files. I'll give you a PDF, and that's it. But that's not good enough. A PDF is a fixed image. You can't do anything with it. So in my contracts, I write this into the contract, and I advise you to talk to your designer about it before you start the project. Tell them you want, at the end of the project, after you paid the final bill, you want all the files that were used to produce that cover. And I would personally, as an author, I would insist on it. There are many designers have no problem with this, and I think as an independent author and a self-publisher, you should get all those assets you paid for at the end of the project. And I consider that non-negotiable. So what's the designer going to need from you in order to do a great job and create that beautiful book cover for? Well, really important is to know what category your book is in. And you can think of the categories kind of like the shelf where you would find that book if you wandered into a bookstore looking for that kind of book. So if you have travel stories, you're going to find that book in the travel section, right? That's your category. And many authors don't really get this, but it's actually quite important because the category indicates what other books you're going to be selling against. And it also is going to tell you what the readers of those kinds of books expect. Like if I read thrillers, I know what a thriller looks like. I can tell you from across the room if the book is a thriller, and that's a good thing. If it doesn't look like that, I might not even know that that's a book I should be considering. If it looks like a history or a book about gardening instead of a thriller, that's not going to help you or your sales. So if you have artwork or photos you like, give those to the designer. Send the designer links to covers you love or ones you just make your skin crawl. That might be a good idea because you don't want to have that coming back at you. You're going to have to supply a cover for the back copy of the book. And let your designer know any other details about your publishing program that are going to have an impact, like if it's part of a series or you want to brand it in some way. All of that's going to come into consideration. And I just want to make a note about those special art. I've actually had this happen as a designer. I've had people come to me and say, here's a photo, Joel. And I've had this photo stuck on my refrigerator for the last 4 years. And I always said, man, if I ever write a book, this is what's going to be on the cover. And, if you find that yourself in that situation, give the photo to the designer and just tell them it's one option they might like to consider. Because remember, as I said earlier, we're creating these books to please the readers, not the authors. Now, we've gone about a half hour into this presentation. We want to leave time for Q&A. I want to remind you that a lot of the things that we've suggested here about finding editors and book cover designers are covered in our recent book that Betty and I just published in January, The Self-Publisher's Ultimate Resource Guide. And you can find a lot of services in there, and that's exactly why we did it, to help people find vendors like illustrators, lettering artists, print-on-demand suppliers, short-run book printers, just about every kind of person you could imagine that you would need to become an independent publisher. So what I'd like to do is to throw this open to your questions now, and I think Karen's going to handle those questions for us. And I also want to say that if you have questions that, this happens to me, the webinar turns off, and as soon as the screen goes dark, I think, oh yeah, I wanted to ask this other question, I totally forgot. So if that happens to you, or if you think of something later, or if you're watching this on a replay, you can leave a message for, you can address it to either myself or Betty at our Twitter handle, which you can see on the screen, Bookworks Betty and JF Bookmen, and make sure you include the Kirkus webinar hashtag in there, because I get a lot of traffic on my Twitter channel, and I'd like to be able to find you. I will be monitoring that for the next few days, watching to see if there are questions coming up on this, and I want to be able to find them. So ask your questions now, and we'll see if Karen has any ready to go.
Yep, we've got some questions. Thanks a lot, Joel and Betty.
Sure thing.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions about how Kirkus operates, and then some more questions about editorial services and covers. So somebody asked, how do you apply for a review? Anybody can get a review. You go to Kirkus.com and click for authors, and you'll see instructions there to upload your manuscript. And somebody else had a question about which formats we accept. So we accept Microsoft Word, a PDF, or if you've got print books, you can mail those to our New York office, and all of that information is online. Another question was how much do we charge for the reviews? And it is the fee is $425 for a standard review, which takes 7 to 9 weeks for you to get back. Or if you need it faster, we charge $575 for an express, and we'll get that back to you within 4 to 6 weeks. Somebody had asked also why we charge so much. And we pay our reviewers. We have professional reviewers who have been writing for years. There are also professional editors and copy editors and fact checkers. We have overhead for the New York office, and then a website, an extensive website that gets over 1 million page views monthly. But also, if you use your discount, then that's $50 off, and the review would be $375. Okay, so some of the questions for Joel and Betty. I think this one would be for Betty. The question is, how soon do you bring in a developmental editor? At the first rough draft?
That is a very good question. I think if you bring somebody in at the first rough draft, which is the way I often work when I do freelance editing, it's marvelous because this editor can save you lots of time going down the wrong track, pursuing, ideas or plot thoughts that don't really lend themselves to what you're working on. So if you can afford that, I would do that. Otherwise, I would wait until you have your first draft and then approach the editors, the ones that you have found online that seem to be the right ones for you, that do the kind of book, or that have had experience with the kind of book you're publishing, and approach the person once you've had your first draft. But frequently, if you can manage it, it's very good to get somebody to help you just as soon as you have started your manuscript. That's been my experience, and I think that's where you get the most value from your editor.
Okay.
And yeah, I want to chime in there just for a second, Karen, because for the nonfiction authors, I don't know if we have any nonfiction authors on here today because we seem to be inundated with fiction authors, but if there are any nonfiction authors out there, and this might sound a little outrageous, but I would talk to a developmental editor who knows your field before you write the book. Make up an outline of what your idea is and some idea of how you think it's going to position in the market, and then go have a chat with an editor who knows your field. It will be very, very valuable to you.
That's excellent advice. Absolutely.
And do you recommend hiring a different editor for each stage, or stick to one throughout the whole process?
Oh, I would absolutely stick to one throughout the whole process. I mean, of course, if you're working with an editor and you don't feel that it's going well, then you would certainly want to change. But I think working with an editor is a little bit like working with a shrink. It's a very close and personal, intense relationship. And this is somebody who knows your book better than anybody else in the world, and you want consistency. I mean, if you were seeing a shrink, you wouldn't change every time you had a new problem. The consistency is really important. And then sometimes it does happen that at the end of your editorial process, you think, I'm not completely satisfied with what I've got here. I'm going to get another editor to just take a look at this, give me a reading, an evaluation. If they think something major needs to be done, then I'll consider working with that editor. But basically, first time through, I would stick with the person I've hired, unless, of course, if they say you don't get along with them. And let me just interject. I think I didn't mention this earlier, but it is, as Joel says, with a designer, you need a contract or a letter of agreement. You absolutely need the same thing with your editor. And in that letter of agreement, be sure to talk about how you can resolve your relationship if it's not working for either one of you. You know, if the editor feels this isn't too cool, or if you feel it. So that's an important thing to know in general in working with an editor.
Okay, and what do you think is essential for a back cover for a print book?
Well, I could speak to that for a moment. A back cover of your print book is actually pretty critical, and what you're going to find on the back cover of most books is a distillation of the original pitch for the book. In other words, when you make up your, you know, a lot of people make up a pitch for their book. They try to condense it down to signify what is appealing to it, who it appeals to, what other books it might remind you of, and somehow that back cover copy coalesces all of that kind of information. It kind of hooks you into the story or the concepts in the book, gives you some foundation from which to compare it maybe to other things, and really entices you into the book. So back cover copy has become really quite important. And if you picture yourself last time you went to a bookstore, you know, you're probably a lot like me. If I'm wandering in the bookstore in that kind of haze you get into where you're just kind of scanning around for things and you see something that attracts you, what do? The first thing you do is you pick it up and you flip the book over. So realize that what situation your book is in at that moment. You are either going to grab somebody's interest right there and then, or they're going to put the book down. So that's the most critical thing about the back cover copy. It has to draw people into the story.
Exactly. And in the traditional business, we used to think of the back covers as free advertising. As Joel says, you pick up the book, here's everything you need to know. This is why it's different from the other books, what some of the reviewers have said about it, why you should buy it. So look at that as free ad space, and I think it'll help a lot.
Thanks. And I don't know if the two of you can give a ballpark estimate, but people are interested to know about the prices for book cover design. Is there a range that you can
Sure. Oh, absolutely. There's a very interesting range, actually, Karen, because you know, at one end, there are all the people that Mark Coker over at Smashwords is always talking about, where you can get your cover design for $50. Even though I keep telling them, Mark, you know, cover designers have to eat too. We've got kids. Basically, the range these days runs from about, let's say, $50 or $100 up to about $3,500 is around the top end for the most self-publishers, any self-publishers are paying. Now, very few people are paying those kind of rates. I would say that the majority of authors are paying in the $200 to $800 range for a book cover these days if they're finding their designer online. If they want to hire somebody who really has a lot of experience in traditional publishing, they're probably going to be paying about $1,200 to $1,500 or $1,800. And if you have special needs or you have a really a book that you are convinced is going to be attractive for a national advertising campaign or promotion, and you actually have the ability to put that into practice, then you may be paying, you know, up to $3,500, I would say, from some of the top designers who service the indie community.
Great. Okay, thank you. And someone wanted to know where the replay of this webinar will be available. If you go to Kirkus's YouTube channel at youtube.com/KirkusReviews, you can see it there. And do you have any ideas about any recommendations for distribution?
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question. Yes, it's really important, and I would say anybody planning on getting into wide distribution. In other words, if you're not somebody who just wants to experiment, you want to find out how the publishing business works, you're going to publish a book, you're going to put it up with the online retailers and just see how it goes. Now, a lot of people are in that situation. If you're going to do print books and you really want to put them into distribution, I highly recommend that you spend some time either doing research or consulting with somebody who knows this field. It's not that easy to figure out, and the reason I'm saying that is because there is a production and marketing matrix in a way where the kind of book you're producing has to really fit properly with the way that you intend to market that book and the audience you're marketing it to. And so that has to line up. And a part of that is the way books are produced, how much they cost to produce, and how they're discounted in the distribution channel in the United States. The whole book distribution system in the United States requires that you actually understand some mathematics to figure out the best way to distribute your book. And it's not really within the scope of this webinar, and I can't really explain this in 5 minutes, but every book is different in this regard. Some books will distribute really well, and there are distributors who are open to self-published authors. Not that many of them, but there are some. For most authors, they're just going to put it with a print-on-demand supplier, and they're going to call that distribution, because the print-on-demand supplier will make it available to wholesalers and retailers. But if you're really intent on real distribution, that is putting your book in bookstores all over the country, I highly recommend you go and sit down and talk to somebody who knows how this works before you spend a penny anywhere.
Okay. And Joel, I think I might know what you're going to have to say about pre-made book covers. But people are interested in pre-made book covers. Do you have anything to say about those?
Yeah, you know, you'd be surprised, Karen. I don't. I'm very open to all these approaches, and the reason is I see my job as helping authors get their books done as good as possible, the best possible books they can produce. And authors have a lot of their own ideas. Like, I've been slammed by actually writing about places like 99 Designs. And the pre-made book covers are in the same category. You can go and buy a pre-made book cover. I've seen them. Some of them are actually quite good. And I would say most of the ones I've looked at are better than the book covers that authors try to do themselves. So if you're down and your budget is such that that's the only choice you have, you can either do it yourself or buy a pre-made book cover, I'm going to tell you right now, go get that pre-made book cover now. Get it today, because it's going to be better. It's going to do better for you. Is it unique? Was it designed specifically for your book? Are you guaranteed absolutely you're never going to see it on another book? No. None of those things will happen. So, you know, you may be opening yourself up to that, and obviously they are generic because they have to be pre-made book covers, but if that's your best choice, then take it and do the best you can with that book, and hopefully market that book so the next book that comes around, you will have the budget to hire a designer.
Great, thanks. And somebody has a question about which genres Kirkus reviews. Within Kirkus Indie, we review anything. If it's fiction, nonfiction, if it's a book about studying for the MCATs, whatever kind of book you write, we will review, with the exception of some very technical books. But you're always welcome to go to the Kirkus site and email one of the editors about your book if you have any questions. But for the most part, we review all genres. And this is a question about what happens if an editor is editing the style out of your manuscript?
Well, by that, I take that to mean that you, the author, don't like what the editor is doing. I mean, if you have a particular style and the editor just comes along and wrecks it, as I said before, I would trust my instinct. If that's not how you want to be perceived, if that's not the way you express yourself, then I really would have a chat with that editor, see if you can resolve the problem, and if not, then I would find a different editor. Because, as I say, it's your book. This is your art. This is your creation. And you certainly, although somebody can help you fix things a little bit and change them here and there, you want it to be your creation, and that's what you're showing the world. And so, frankly, I would change editors in that circumstance. Mm-hmm. If you couldn't resolve it. I mean, if you tried and said, I'm happy with what you're doing, I write this way, you write that way. An editor, a good editor, is not a writer. By that, I mean, I'm not a rewriter. A good editor doesn't come in and change things and fix things and make them different. They take the best of what you've got and they just make that shine. You know, they can pull out your strengths and help you develop those, but they certainly don't try to overrule what you, the author, want the book to be.
Great. Okay, and do you have ideas for a general quote for a typical budget for a self-pub writer?
Well,
For
I was
editing,
afraid you're going to ask that. Oh, you mean a budget for the whole Megillah, the
Exactly.
design and the editing and everything?
Right.
Oh, that's
I actually wrote a whole series of articles on this question a couple of years ago, Karen, and it was very interesting because I broke them down into 3 different kinds of self-publishers and then looked at all the pricing in like 9 different categories. And, it's very hard to say without knowing what kind of publisher the questioner wants to be, because there are lots of ways publishing and trying to do it professionally are spending between $2,500 and $5,000. It's hard to get it done for less than $2,500. You may not have to spend more than that, but if you don't have $2,000 or $3,000 in your pocket, it's going to be hard to get the kind of professional quality results that are really going to help you when you launch that book in the marketplace. And you also have to consider the fact that every year more authors are publishing their own books. Now, personally, I think that's a good thing. I'm not somebody who thinks that's a bad thing. But on the other hand, for authors, you have to recognize that a lot of those people are your competition. How are you going to make your book stand out? Well, the easiest possible way to make it stand out is to make it the best possible book you can, because many of those books being published are not very book
Right.
will stand out, and when it hits Kirkus or another reviewer, those people are book professionals. They're going to know the instant they see that book whether it was an amateur production or not right away, and just think about the influence that's going to have on them when they make that determination. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, exactly. And we've really, within Kirkus Indie, we've seen the quality of the editing change dramatically, even within the past few years. And our reviewers, often they'll see a book that has potential that hasn't been edited all that well, and they will call out the author and mention some of the errors that they see. And some authors use that information for feedback to go back and revise. And in terms of budget, can you talk about the budget for just the editing, for the copy editing and developmental editing?
Right. Well, it depends. With developmental editing, most editors work in one of 2 ways. They either work by the hour, and that tends to be for an experienced professional editor between $100 and $150 an hour, and then it's open-ended depending on how much work the manuscript needs, or with by a flat fee, and the fee can be expensive. In New York, for example, it's often between $12,000 and $15,000 for the complete manuscript. It doesn't have to be that high, and again, it depends on the length of the work and on the writer and the amount of work that needs to be done. But it can be a significant investment. But the other side of it is, if you want to hire the very best, the people who have seen what works and what doesn't work, who have worked on bestsellers time and again, traditionally published, it might be worth it to you. So, as I say, it's either an hourly fee or a flat fee. And with copy editors, it's almost always an hourly fee. And they charge, I guess, from $40 up to, I'm not sure what the high end, maybe $80. I would have to check on that. I'm not so sure. And I would say the proofreaders are roughly the same as a copy editor, hourly and you agree on the hourly fee. But the developmental editors are the ones who really can be expensive, but in my experience, almost without exception, worth it, if one can swing that, if it's in your budget.
Okay, and thanks, Betty. And for book designers, do they do just the graphics, or do they do the whole layout of the front and back cover?
Okay, so there are a lot of book designers. There are book cover designers. Some of them only do book covers. There are book designers who do complete books. They do the cover and the interior, and they may also do ebook conversions and collateral material like posters or bookmarks or business cards using the graphics from the branding from the book. And then there are people who only do book interiors, and then there who are designers. They just design book interiors. And then there are some people that were kind of generically called formatters. And you'll see a lot of that online these days, people advertising themselves as formatters. They don't really do much in the way of design. They might use a template, or they might just, format your book for ebook submissions. But so it depends on the designer. Some people do it all, and there's no particular plus or minus to whether your designer does the interior and the cover. Obviously, if you have a full-service designer, it's going to be one less person to deal with, or two fewer people to deal with. And if they can do all of those services for you, I recommend doing that. I think that's a good deal, because as an author, you're going to be kind of overwhelmed with learning the publishing process and dealing with a lot of people you never dealt with before. And so the more you can simplify that, I think the more enjoyable and productive you will be. So try initially to look for a full-service designer who's willing to do both the inside and the outside, and the ebook conversions, and that will save you some time.
Okay, and now what happens, someone's asking if they don't like the book cover design that they get.
Well, typically the way this works, and that's another reason you want to have an agreement. As Betty said, one of the important things that's covered in any contract is how to cancel the contract. I mean, that's one of the main reasons we write the contracts. Because, look, the designer could get fed up with you just the way you could not like the designs. So these things happen in life. We're all humans. So the agreement that you sign is going to cover that. But the way it works basically is this. You're going to go to a designer. You're going to tell them about your book. They may have a lot of questions. Some designers, I noticed one of my favorite designers has a very extensive questionnaire online you have to fill out before he takes your job. And then what they're going to do is they're going to come back and they're going to present you with maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 different covers that they've come up with your book. And they're going to hope that one of those represents an avenue that you like, and that you can then start refining that particular approach to the book cover, and you will that way reach a successful conclusion. If in the end you decide that the cover designer is totally off base and there's no hope of getting back on track, then you're going to go back to your contract to see what are the cancellation terms. I can tell you what I do. I do my billings as progress billings. You pay at the beginning when you sign the contract. You pay in the middle when we reach a milestone. You pay at the end. So anytime you want to bail out, that's perfectly fine. You have to, there's no refund in that case. You pay up front. Some designers, I know one cover designer, if you don't like his covers, he will just refund all the money you've spent. So it all depends on what is in that agreement you make up front with the designer, and that's one of the most important reasons you do it, just in case things don't work out the way you thought they were going to.
Okay, and there are some questions about jacket copy and how to find people that will write a back cover synopsis. Do you have some suggestions for that?
Well, often in traditional publishing, it is the editor that you are assigned who writes your copy. So you might be able to work out an arrangement with the editor whom you hire to help you with the copy. I mean, you the author would do a draft, and then the editor could help you polish it. And there are people who do advertising and promotional copy as a full-time profession. So that's where you would look in the Self-Publisher's Ultimate Resource Guide to find lists of those people, or look online to see people who do that. But if you have a really good, smart, sensitive, experienced editor, often this editor can help you with that. But again, make sure at the outset that you have made it clear that you would like the editor to do that, and that the editor is willing to help you do that. Write the really good selling copy.
Okay. And do you have some suggestions for the best print-on-demand suppliers?
Yeah, well, we have two major print-on-demand suppliers available for independent authors. There are a lot of other ones. I use CreateSpace myself to publish to Amazon. I use Ingram to publish to the rest of the book trade. They're both very good, although they're very different. As of now, you can only get into Ingram Spark, which is a very good service and offers Ingram's very, very extensive book distribution to anybody who prints there, and that's not nothing. They distribute to 130 some odd countries, and they're the biggest book distributor in the world. Now, there are other people coming into the business. BookBaby, for instance, who has been an ebook distributor, is now a print-on-demand supplier. My only caveat about some of the smaller print-on-demand suppliers is you have to be very careful with their pricing because they are buying their service from the same people that are producing the books for Ingram, and that is Ingram. Basically, they're the biggest manufacturer, and so it's because they have to add a profit for themselves. Their books are not going to be priced as competitively in general as going directly to Ingram or CreateSpace, which also has very good pricing. So those are the two major options. If you have a book that doesn't fit, for instance, you have a trim size you absolutely have to have that they don't offer, something crazy like that, or you have to have the front of your books embossed, which they won't do, then you're going to have to look for somebody else. But by and large, most people will be best served, in my opinion, by sticking with either CreateSpace or Ingram.
And Ingram Spark will distribute your ebooks to independent booksellers. Sometimes it's difficult if you're just working with Amazon. It's difficult to sell your books through indie bookstores, but Ingram Spark can make that work.
Yeah, and that's really a good reason to, if you're doing print books, it's really good. All of my clients are at both CreateSpace and Ingram Spark. You don't have to choose one or the other. I highly recommend you use both of them, and there are some little details about doing that you need to follow, but that's probably the best solution, crazy though it seems, right now in the market. As far as ebook distribution, when you come to distributing your ebooks, you really want to check pricing and discounts and royalty rates because although Ingram does have the capacity to be your one-stop shop for all your distribution, you will make a lot less money per book if you distribute your ebooks through Ingram. They are trying to work on that, and I'm in touch with those people fairly regularly. But as of today, you know, the distribution deals on ebooks are far better other places, unfortunately. Now, maybe that will change, but that's the situation as of today.
Okay, and I just want to, we have time for about one more question. I just want to remind everyone that if you do have questions that we didn't get to today, please remember that you can tweet Joel and use the hashtag KirkusWebinar. And he or Betty can answer your questions after the webinar. So
absolutely.
And I also wanted to thank Joel and Betty. There's a ton of really great information, and their book sounds like it'd be a great Bible for self-pub writers. So the last question is, for a self-pubbed author, is it important for them to create a publisher name and logo?
Well, my opinion is that you don't need a logo per se, but you definitely should have a name. In other words, you don't want to really publish a book, if you plan to do this commercially, you don't want to publish a book that's like the Self-Publisher's Resource Guide, written by Joel Friedlander, published by Joel Friedlander. It just makes you look kind of amateurish, if you know what I mean. So create a publisher name. It doesn't have to be exotic. You know, it could be Two Doors Press or Pathway Publishing. I mean, you know, just pick something that appeals to you. And, you know, you generally need to do a fictitious business name filing in your locality so that if anybody pays you under that name, you can actually cashier the checks. But that's about all there is to it. So then once you have your publisher name, when you buy your ISBNs from Bowker, you can use your publisher name. You can do your publisher setup there. I highly recommend you don't do it in your own name. Just come up with a name. Don't worry about a logo. A logo is not a necessity unless that's something that really turns you on, then go and do it. But that publisher name, I think, is really important because, you know, the Self-Publisher's Resource Guide published by Marin Bookworks sounds better than published by Joel Friedlander. And for information, contact Joel Friedlander. And for permissions, get a hold of Joel. And, you know, it starts to sound like kind of amateur hour. And that's not the impression you want to leave. So it's just a little tiny adjustment. It's going to cost me about $35 to do that. Took a couple of weeks, and that was many years ago. I've been using my publisher name ever since.
Great.
I completely agree with that.
Thanks again, you two. That's the end of our webinar. Please remember you can go to youtube.com/Kirkus Reviews to watch this again. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody at Kirkus for having us. It's been great, and thanks for everybody for turning out. I really appreciate it.
As do I. Thank you so much, everybody.